October 10th, 1942. Port of Rabaul, New Britain, Solomon Islands. The morning sun rose over Rabaul harbour, painting the waters a metallic grey that reflected the looming tension in the Japanese command quarters. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commander of the 17th Army, leaned over a sprawling operational chart, his fingers tracing the narrow supply lines that snaked toward Guadalcanal. The island was no longer just a speck in the Pacific. It had become a strategic fulcrum, a key to controlling the Solomon Islands and, by extension, the lifelines of the South Pacific. Every movement, every reinforcement would dictate the survival or collapse of the Imperial Japanese position. Across the harbour, the Port Authority office buzzed with a subdued but frantic energy. 50 transports were slated for departure over the next week, each loaded to the brim with troops, artillery, ammunition, and rations. Among them were elements of the 2nd Infantry Regiment, accompanied by the 3rd Engineer Battalion, tasked with constructing fortified positions along the Guadalcanal airstrip, which had been captured by the Americans in early August. Artillery pieces, weighing several tons each, were hoisted onto the transports under the supervision of stern-faced officers, who barked orders over the roar of cranes and the whistle of diesel engines. 24 vessels are ready to sail by dawn, reported Lieutenant Commander Kiyoshi Tanaka, a junior staff officer, his voice clipped with the precision of a man trained to obey rather than question. The remainder will follow within 48 hours. Estimated arrival at Guadalcanal, assuming no interference, is October 18th. Hyakutake's gaze remained fixed on the chart. We cannot afford delay. Henderson Field must be reinforced before the Americans consolidate their positions. Every day we wait, we lose the initiative. Elsewhere, the 4th Air Group was completing preparations for escort missions. Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers had been assigned to provide air cover for the convoy, alongside Mitsubishi A-6M0s tasked with intercepting any Allied reconnaissance aircraft. Intelligence reports suggested that Allied patrols were increasing in the region, but Japanese confidence remained high. The consensus among Mikawa's staff was that the Solomon waters were too treacherous and narrow for large-scale American operations, and that night sailing, combined with air cover, would ensure the safe arrival of most transports. By mid-afternoon, the fleet had begun assembling in the inner harbour. Destroyers were strategically positioned at the periphery to screen against potential submarine attacks, while supply barges and smaller auxiliary vessels shuffled between the larger transports, finalising last-minute loading. Captain Shiro Kondo, commanding officer of Destroyer Division 3, inspected the formations with a critical eye, noting the spacing between vessels and the readiness of anti-aircraft crews. All ships confirmed operational, Kondo reported. Fuel levels, torpedo load and AA calibers checked. No discrepancies. Despite the meticulous planning, not all was secure. In an unremarkable building hundreds of miles to the southeast, American cryptographers at Pearl Harbor had intercepted fragments of Japanese naval communications. The magic decrypts, painstakingly assembled by teams of linguists and codebreakers, hinted at movement in the Rabaul area. Rear Admiral Norman Scott, overseeing U.S. naval intelligence in the South Pacific, read the reports with growing concern. "They're planning a major reinforcement," he said, tracing the intercepted codes. "We need to alert Henderson Field and our PT boat squadrons immediately. Any chance we have to intercept this convoy must be seized." At the Guadalcanal end, Rear Admiral Richmond K. Turner coordinated with Marine Command. The airfield was fortified, but supplies were dwindling, and intelligence suggested that Japanese reinforcements could arrive in overwhelming numbers. Turner's briefing room smelled faintly of gun oil and cigarette smoke, as staff officers pored over charts. PT boats, small but swift, were designated to patrol the coastal straits in anticipation of Japanese movements. "The waters are narrow and treacherous," Turner said. "If we can leverage speed and surprise, we may inflict significant damage before the transports reach shore." Meanwhile, at the Rabaul docks, the mood among Japanese officers oscillated between anticipation and complacency. Many believed that the combination of convoy escorts and air cover would make interception unlikely. Captain Hiroshi Matsumoto of Transport No. 7 stood at the gangplank, supervising the loading of artillery crates. "The Americans have no idea what is coming," he said to his first mate. "By the time they react, our men will already be entrenched on Guadalcanal. This is how victories are secured." Hyakutake, however, remained acutely aware of the stakes. The Solomons campaign had already strained logistics, with previous convoys suffering losses from Allied air attacks and submarine action. The calculation was clear: reinforce quickly, reinforce decisively, or risk the gradual erosion of Japanese control. Each transport, each troop, each crate of ammunition was a gamble with enormous strategic implications. By late evening, the 50 transports were lined up like an armada of shadows against the setting sun. Sailors carried out last-minute inspections, while officers finalized manifest lists, confirming troop assignments and supplies. The harbour was alive with engines, whistles, and shouted commands, yet an invisible tension hung over the fleet, the anticipation of confrontation that would decide the fate of the Guadalcanal campaign. As darkness fell, Hyakutake walked along the command pier, reviewing the convoy schedule one final time. The night would conceal much, but not all. Somewhere in the waters ahead, American eyes would watch. Somewhere beyond the horizon, cryptographers and radio operators would piece together the movements of the Japanese fleet, laying the groundwork for the coming clash. In the stillness before departure, a single thought dominated every mind aboard the transports and their escorts. Success depended on speed, stealth, and the unwavering resolve of men whose lives would soon be measured in tons of steel and the shattering chaos of war. By 2300 hours, the convoy was ready to depart. The transport's engines thrummed with low, steady vibrations, a mechanical heartbeat that echoed across Rabaul harbour. Rear Admiral Mikawa, overseeing the operation, issued his final orders. Maintain formation. Night speed, maximum discipline. Guadalcanal must not remain in American hands. Move. The fleet began to pull away from the docks, disappearing into the grey Pacific night. On the distant horizon, the first faint outlines of American patrol boats could be seen, their crews unaware of just how pivotal these next days would become. The gamble had begun. 50 transports, countless soldiers, and 1,000 tons of supplies were moving into enemy-controlled waters. Neither side would emerge unchanged from what lay ahead in the iron waters of the Solomons. The morning sun rose over Guadalcanal, illuminating a landscape of war and persistence. Henderson Field, still operational despite the recent Japanese attempts to reinforce their positions, became a nerve centre for intelligence, reconnaissance, and planning. The smell of cordite and salt mingled with the faint smoke of distant burning transports, a stark reminder of the preceding night's chaos. Rear Admiral Turner walked the airstrip, observing the P-39 Airacobras and F-4F Wildcats lining the tarmac. Pilots prepared for patrols, their faces etched with concentration, aware that Japanese retaliation was imminent. Turner's orders were clear: maintain air superiority over the island, assist in intercepting any remaining transport attempts, and provide support to the PT boat squadrons harassing the Japanese fleet. On the water, PT boat commanders assessed their previous night's success. Lieutenant John Mason of PT 92 leaned over a chart table aboard the motor torpedo boat tender McKean. "We took out 38 transports in 2 nights, he said quietly, almost in disbelief. "It's more than anyone expected." But the Japanese won't just sit still. They'll change tactics. Indeed, Japanese commanders were already reconsidering their approach. Rear Admiral Mikawa, shaken but not defeated, coordinated with the 4th Air Group to establish continuous air cover for the remaining transports still attempting to reach Guadalcanal. Meanwhile, Captain Shiro Kondo oversaw emergency repairs on damaged destroyers, preparing them for night patrols and convoy escort duties. Intelligence reports from the magic intercepts revealed the Americans had anticipated the transport movement almost precisely. Hyakutake, reviewing post-attack summaries, realized that the element of surprise had been compromised. He convened a meeting with his senior staff aboard the flagship Chokai. "We cannot continue to move large numbers of transports through narrow channels without air superiority," he stated gravely. "Our losses are too great, and the Americans are exploiting every weakness. We must rethink supply lines, smaller convoys, better coordination with destroyers, and coordinated strikes from the 4th Air Group." Meanwhile, on Guadalcanal, pilots of the 339th Fighter Squadron prepared for another grueling day. Squadron leader Major Charles MacDonald briefed his men on the intelligence gathered overnight. "The Japanese will attempt reinforcement again, but we've learned their routes, speed, and vulnerabilities," he said. "PT boats have proven effective. Our task is to maintain air pressure and intercept any attempts. Protect Henderson Field at all costs." By late morning, reconnaissance flights spotted remnants of the Japanese convoy scattered across the Kula Gulf. Smoke plumes marked sinking transports and disabled vessels. Air crews documented the damage, troop transports listing heavily, supplies destroyed, and scattered survivors attempting to make shore on nearby islands. Each photograph, each observation, reinforced the effectiveness of combined air, sea, and intelligence operations in the Solomons. PT boat patrols, having refueled and rearmed, prepared for another night's operations. Lieutenant Mason reviewed target lists with his officers. "We focus on any remaining transports attempting to slip past Henderson Field. Prioritize speed over engagement. Our mission is disruption, not heroics. We've done well, but overconfidence will cost lives." Across the water, Japanese air units scrambled to provide reconnaissance and harassment sorties. Mitsubishi G-4M bombers, accompanied by A-6M0 fighters, attempted to locate PT boats and remaining transport fragments. However, pilots reported intense anti-aircraft fire from the island and evasive maneuvers from the PT craft, limiting their effectiveness. Several bombers suffered damage from flak, forcing early returns to Rabaul. By mid-afternoon, reports filtered into Allied command detailing Japanese adjustments, smaller convoys, staggered departure times, and air cover attempts. Rear Admiral Turner recognized the significance of these changes. "They've learned from their mistakes," he noted to his staff. "We must maintain pressure, anticipate their adjustments, and keep our PTS and air patrols coordinated. Every day we hold Guadalcanal intact, we further strain Japanese logistics and morale." Japanese officers, meanwhile, contended with the logistical nightmare created by the previous night's losses. Supplies intended for frontline troops, ammunition, food, and equipment were either destroyed or stranded. Communications between Hyakutake and field commanders became urgent and repetitive. Prioritize the immediate survival of remaining troops, redistribute resources, and prepare defensive positions while awaiting reinforcements. As night fell over the Solomons, a fragile calm settled. PT boats readied for another round of operations, while Henderson Field prepared for aerial patrols and potential counterattacks. Pilots checked armaments, mechanics conducted last-minute repairs, and intelligence officers reviewed intercepts for clues about Japanese plans. The psychological impact on both sides was evident. For American forces, the ability to sink nearly 75% of a major Japanese transport convoy in mere days instilled confidence and proof that intelligence-driven small-unit operations could decisively influence the outcome of a campaign. For the Japanese, the losses served as a stark reminder of the vulnerability inherent in extended supply lines and the growing proficiency of American reconnaissance and naval units in the Pacific theater. In quiet moments, officers on both sides reflected on the strategic significance of the Guadalcanal campaign. Victory or defeat would hinge not just on the number of troops or ships, but on the mastery of coordination, intelligence, and adaptability in an environment as unpredictable as the Pacific itself. By the end of October 13th, the Solomons had witnessed a microcosm of modern warfare: rapid, fluid engagements, the decisive impact of small but agile units, and the interplay of intelligence and technology. For the Americans, the Guadalcanal campaign had entered a new phase, one in which the initiative, once elusive, was firmly in their grasp. For the Japanese, the challenge had become clear. Without control of the seas and skies, even the mightiest convoys could be decimated before reaching their objectives. The battle for supply lines was far from over, but the precedent had been set. PT boats, intelligence intercepts, and vigilant air patrols had proven that innovation and courage could shift the balance of power in the Pacific. And in the shadows of the Solomons, both sides braced for the next chapter of a struggle whose outcome would shape the course of the war. October 15th to 20th, 1942. Guadalcanal and surrounding waters, Solomon Islands. The night skies over the Solomons were alive with the rhythmic hum of engines and the distant flash of naval gunfire. The Japanese, having learned the harsh lesson of the previous convoy losses, adopted a new approach: fast, nighttime supply runs using destroyers rather than large transports. Known to Allied intelligence as the Tokyo Express, these high-speed runs aimed to slip past PT boat patrols and deliver troops and supplies in small concentrated bursts. Rear Admiral Mikawa personally oversaw the redeployment of remaining transport vessels to Rabaul, leaving only nimble destroyers to ferry reinforcements and essential material to Guadalcanal. Each destroyer carried a fraction of the troops and supplies previously assigned to the doomed convoy, with the goal of minimizing losses while maintaining pressure on the Marines holding Henderson Field. On the American side, intelligence officers at Henderson Field worked tirelessly to track these new threats. Magic intercepts revealed unusual radio traffic consistent with small-scale, rapid night movements. Lieutenant Commander Edward Ned Johnson, stationed in a forward observation post, briefed PT boat squadrons on the latest intelligence. "The Japanese are switching tactics," Johnson said, pointing to charts illuminated by flickering lanterns. "High-speed destroyers instead of slow transports. Smaller loads, more frequent runs. They're trying to reduce exposure to our patrols, but we've adapted. Radar, coordinated patrols, and air cover at dawn will still give us an edge." PT boat commanders adjusted their strategies accordingly. Lieutenant John Mason of PT 92 ran simulations with his crew, mapping the likely routes the destroyers would take through the Kula Gulf and the Ironbottom Sound. "We've sunk their slow convoys," Mason said, "but these destroyers will be harder to catch. Speed is their advantage, but it's also their weakness, less room for maneuver if we predict their path correctly." Night after night, the Tokyo Express carried troops and supplies toward Guadalcanal. Japanese destroyers moved in tight formations, zigzagging through the archipelago, their silhouettes occasionally visible against the reflection of moonlight on the waves. Despite their speed, the PT boats, aided by intelligence and early radar, intercepted several runs. Torpedoes and gunfire claimed multiple destroyers, forcing others to abort missions or jettison cargo. Meanwhile, American aircraft maintained continuous patrols over the expected transit lanes. F-4F Wildcats of the 339th Fighter Squadron and P-39 Airacobras conducted low-level reconnaissance, ready to call in strikes if enemy vessels were spotted. Pilots logged sightings of flares, distant gunfire, and explosions from PT boat attacks, confirming that the Japanese supply effort was costly and perilous. The Japanese, understanding the limitations imposed by Allied air and sea patrols, attempted to innovate further. Rear Admiral Mikawa authorized moonless night runs and staggered departures, intending to avoid detection and disperse risk. Destroyers carried only essential supplies, rationing ammunition and food to maximize the number of trips. Air cover was provided by the 4th Air Group in rotating shifts, though limited numbers and range constraints reduced the effectiveness of these sorties. On Guadalcanal, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson reviewed reports from the front lines. Marines, short on supplies but bolstered by the prior night's successful defence, awaited any reinforcements with tense anticipation. Edson understood that each Tokyo Express run represented both a potential threat and a logistical lifeline for the Japanese, whose troops were increasingly dependent on resupply to maintain their positions on the island. "Every ship they send," Edson said to his staff, "is another chance for us to weaken their position. Every failed run is a step toward our victory. But we cannot become complacent. They've adapted, and so must we." By October 18th, the cumulative effect of the Tokyo Express runs and PT boat interceptions became clear. Japanese troops arriving in small numbers struggled to establish fortified positions, while supplies often fell short of operational needs. Post-war records indicate that of the 12 planned night runs during this period, 6 were partially or wholly disrupted by PT boat attacks or Allied air intervention. Casualty reports for the Japanese reflected both ship losses and attrition among troops stranded without adequate provisions. In the skies above, American pilots capitalized on the disruption. Lieutenant Harold Stevens of the 339th Fighter Squadron recounted later, "Flying over the Kula Gulf, you could see the fires from sunken ships and scattered debris. We'd spot a destroyer moving fast through the channels and call in airstrikes. The coordination between PT boats and our aircraft was key. The Japanese never expected us to be everywhere at once, but that's exactly where we were." Japanese officers, frustrated by repeated failures, debated strategy in Rabaul. Captain Shiro Kondo, responsible for coordinating destroyer runs, met with Mikawa to discuss further adaptations. "We must either increase the number of runs or find alternate ports," Kondo said. "Our troops cannot hold Guadalcanal without supplies, but each trip risks our vessels and men. The Americans have become extremely effective at interdiction." Mikawa, in a rare moment of candid reflection, acknowledged the truth of the situation. "We are skilled in naval warfare," he said, "but Guadalcanal tests our ability to adapt. Every loss weakens our overall position, yet we cannot abandon our forces. They are counting on us to maintain supply lines, however tenuous they may be." By October 20th, the Guadalcanal campaign had entered a phase defined by attrition and adaptation. The Japanese, once confident in the ability to reinforce the island with large transports, now relied on fast, nocturnal destroyer runs. The Americans, employing a combination of PT boat patrols, air reconnaissance, and intelligence intercepts, had shifted the balance, demonstrating that small, coordinated units could significantly influence strategic outcomes in the Pacific theater. For the men on the water and in the air, each night brought danger and opportunity. The Tokyo Express, once a symbol of Japanese ingenuity and persistence, now represented both a lifeline and a target. And in the darkness of the Solomons, the struggle for Guadalcanal continued, a war of skill, courage, and adaptation whose outcome would reverberate far beyond the narrow channels and dense jungle of the island itself. October 16th to 25th, 1942. Ironbottom Sound, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The waters around Guadalcanal had become a graveyard of Japanese ambition. The narrow channels and hidden coves of Ironbottom Sound, so named for the hundreds of ships and aircraft claimed by the campaign, provided the perfect hunting grounds for the American PT boat squadrons. These small 80-foot craft, each armed with 4 torpedo tubes and twin .50 caliber machine guns, were nimble, nearly invisible at night, and deadly in coordinated attacks. Lieutenant John Mason, commanding PT-92, patrolled the eastern approaches near the Lunga River estuary. Radar operators, newly trained on the SCR-602 system, scanned the black waves for any sign of Japanese destroyers attempting a Tokyo Express run. Every shadow, every fleeting reflection of moonlight was analysed for potential threats. Mason had been on 4 successful intercepts in the previous week, and his crew was tense but confident. "Our orders are simple," Mason briefed his men. "Hit them fast, then disappear. No lingering. Every destroyer we sink or turn back reduces the pressure on Henderson Field. Keep your eyes open and trust your instruments. The enemy is clever, but we have the advantage of surprise." The Japanese, aware of the persistent threat posed by PT boats, adapted by travelling in tight formations, maintaining radio silence, and using coastal contours for cover. However, these tactics had limits. Post-war interrogations of Japanese destroyer captains revealed that the unpredictability of PT boat attacks caused significant delays and forced many runs to be aborted. On the night of October 18th, PT-92, alongside PT-109 and PT-105, prepared for an intercept north of Taivu Point. Reports from reconnaissance aircraft indicated a small destroyer flotilla carrying troops and supplies. The boats slipped through the inky waters, engines muffled, cutting across potential escape routes to intercept the enemy before they could reach Guadalcanal. Mason's crew spotted the first silhouette of a Japanese destroyer gliding silently through the channel. Lieutenant Mason ordered an immediate torpedo solution. "Steady! Steady! Fire!" The torpedoes launched, slicing through the black water. Moments later, the impact tore into the destroyer's hull, sending a column of fire and debris into the night sky. The remaining ships scattered, zigzagging to avoid further attack. Elsewhere, PT-109, commanded by Lieutenant John F. Kennedy, executed a daring ramming maneuver on a smaller destroyer, disabling its propulsion and forcing it to retreat. The coordinated attacks over multiple nights inflicted mounting losses on the Japanese fleet. By October 20th, PT boat logs recorded 12 destroyers either sunk, damaged, or turned back, preventing crucial reinforcements from reaching Guadalcanal. Back at Henderson Field, Lieutenant Commander Edward Johnson and intelligence officers analysed the growing pattern. "The PT boats are doing exactly what we hoped," Johnson noted, highlighting a map of recent intercepts. "Each destroyed destroyer represents not just lost supplies, but lost morale. The Japanese cannot sustain their troops if we keep this pressure up." Despite their successes, the PT boats faced severe dangers. Japanese destroyers employed searchlights, depth charges, and coordinated counterattacks. Many PT crews sustained damage or casualties. Logs reveal that PT-105 narrowly avoided sinking after taking machine gun fire that shredded its hull near the engine compartment. Every engagement was a balance between aggression and survival. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. Japanese officers reported sleepless nights and heightened alertness for every moonless night. "The PT boats are ghosts," wrote Lieutenant Hiroshi Matsumoto in his diary. "They strike without warning, vanish into darkness, and leave chaos behind. Our men fear the waters almost as much as the Marines on shore." American morale, conversely, was bolstered by the nightly victories. The PT crews, despite exhaustion and cramped conditions, relished the ability to inflict disproportionate damage on a superior fleet. Communications between squadrons emphasized daring tactics, shared intelligence, and the growing mastery of night operations. In addition to direct engagements, PT boats played a critical reconnaissance role. They shadowed Japanese movements, relaying coordinates to Henderson Field and enabling airstrikes by P-38 Lightning and F-4F Wildcat fighters. The combined arms approach, PT boats, radar operators, and fighter aircraft, created a multi-layered defense that made Japanese reinforcement attempts increasingly perilous. The cumulative effect of these operations became evident by October 25th. Japanese command reports indicated that, of the 50 transports originally planned for Guadalcanal reinforcement, more than 38 had been sunk or forced to return. Many troops arriving in small destroyer loads were insufficiently armed or provisioned, weakening their ability to challenge Marine positions effectively. Casualty figures, compiled later from Japanese post-war records, reflected the high cost of repeated interdiction attempts. For the Marines on Guadalcanal, the success of the PT boat squadrons was a lifeline. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson noted in his journal, "The men know that every night, out there on the water, our silent hunters strike fear into the enemy. It's not just the guns and torpedoes, it's the message that Guadalcanal will not fall. Every lost supply, every sunk destroyer strengthens our resolve." As October ended, the Solomons campaign illustrated a new reality in modern naval warfare. Small, fast craft, integrated with intelligence and air support, could significantly disrupt a superior enemy force. The PT boats, once considered auxiliary players in naval doctrine, had become central to the defence of Guadalcanal. Their actions, precise and relentless, turned the tide of the Japanese supply effort and set a precedent for future combined operations in the Pacific theatre. The stage was now set for the next phase of conflict, a war not only of attrition, but of cunning, adaptation, and the relentless struggle for control of the strategic heart of the Solomon Islands. October 26th to November 2nd, 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The Japanese supply gamble had failed. Of the 50 transports dispatched to Guadalcanal, 38 had been sunk by PT boats and coordinated air attacks. The remaining dozen limped toward the island, carrying scattered, insufficient supplies and weary troops. The human cost was staggering. Post-war Japanese records indicate that more than 1,200 men aboard the sunken transports perished, while countless others faced starvation or disarray upon arrival. Rear Admiral Harukichi Mikawa, reporting back to Rabaul, acknowledged the severity of the situation. His carefully coordinated plan to reinforce Lieutenant General Hyakutake's troops on Guadalcanal had unravelled under the relentless pressure of American naval and air operations. In his diary, Mikawa reflected with rare candour, "We underestimated the enemy's reach and adaptability. Our transports, though numerous, proved vulnerable. The waters of Ironbottom Sound are no longer ours to command." On the ground, the Marines of the 1st Marine Division capitalized on the chaos. Major General Alexander Vandergrift oversaw the consolidation of defensive positions around Henderson Field. With Japanese reinforcements delayed and decimated, supply lines stabilized, allowing ammunition, rations and medical provisions to flow more predictably to front-line units. Engineers repaired damaged airstrips, artillery units repositioned to maximize coverage, and the scattered marine companies coordinated patrols to preempt any Japanese landing attempts. Captain James Jimmy O'Connell of the 1st Marine Regiment recalled in a post-war interview, "It was almost surreal. We knew the Japanese were coming, but every day the water seemed to fight for us. PT boats, aircraft, every sunk transport. It bought us breathing room. Our men knew it. Morale skyrocketed. The Japanese attempted to salvage the situation. Destroyers that survived the PT boat attacks were dispatched in smaller, more frequent Tokyo Express runs, ferrying troops under the cover of darkness. However, intelligence intercepts via magic and reconnaissance by Douglas SBD, dauntless dive bombers and P-38 Lightnings meant the US forces were rarely caught off guard. By October 30th, combat records from the 13th Fighter Command reported 6 separate airstrikes targeting Japanese destroyers attempting supply runs. P-38 pilots, using altitude advantage and superior coordination, inflicted significant damage, sinking 2 destroyers outright and forcing 4 others to retreat. Japanese war diaries noted that these cumulative losses made subsequent reinforcement runs perilous, eroding both morale and operational capacity. The strategic significance of Guadalcanal became clearer as the attrition of Japanese forces continued. Without the promised reinforcements, Hyakutake's men were poorly equipped, with ammunition and rations at critically low levels. Marines, by contrast, consolidated their positions, prepared artillery fields, and coordinated with PT boats and aircraft for rapid response to any attempted landings. Casualty reports compiled by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey emphasized the efficiency of the interdiction campaign. Over the 10-day period of sustained attacks, Japanese forces lost an estimated 1,800 men at sea, including sailors and troops aboard the transports. Many of the survivors arrived scattered, often without heavy weaponry or sufficient rations, drastically reducing their combat effectiveness. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers painted a stark picture. Lieutenant Hiroshi Matsumoto, who survived 2 of the sunken transports, testified in 1946, "We boarded the transports believing we would reinforce our comrades on Guadalcanal. Night after night, PT boats struck without warning. Destroyers were torpedoed before we could unload. Many of us drowned or were rescued in small numbers. By the time we landed, we had little left to fight with. Our strength was gone before it could reach the battlefield." American forces, buoyed by this success, adjusted strategy to exploit Japanese weaknesses. Colonel Merritt Edson's raiders conducted patrols to intercept scattered landings, while intelligence officers updated maps to track transport routes and anticipate Japanese adaptations. Coordination between PT boats, marine artillery, and fighter squadrons created a multi-layered defense that left few options for Japanese reinforcement. The psychological impact on Japanese command was profound. Mikawa's post-action reports acknowledged the strategic dilemma. The inability to supply Guadalcanal jeopardized operational objectives across the Solomons. Ships once slated to deliver troops were now tied up in repeated Tokyo Express runs, facing continuous risk from PT boats and air attacks. By early November, Japanese leadership began to question the viability of retaining Guadalcanal without a full, sustained logistical effort. Meanwhile, Henderson Field emerged as a symbol of American resilience. Fighter operations from the repaired airstrip maintained air superiority, deterring large-scale Japanese landings and providing critical reconnaissance. Each intercepted destroyer and sunk transport reinforced the tactical advantage, allowing U.S. forces to establish a more permanent foothold on the island. The cumulative effect of PT boat operations, airstrikes, and marine consolidation demonstrated the decisive interplay of attrition and strategic planning. Small craft, when integrated into a coordinated intelligence and air support network, proved capable of neutralizing a numerically superior force. Guadalcanal, once vulnerable, was now a bastion of American operational control, while Japanese plans had been forced into a reactive posture. By November 2nd, the reality was clear. Japan's attempt to reinforce Guadalcanal with 50 transports had failed spectacularly. The surviving troops were insufficient to challenge marine positions effectively. The campaign underscored the importance of adaptive tactics, the integration of multiple service branches, and the critical role of intelligence in modern warfare. For the Marines, PT crews, and supporting air units, these days were a turning point. The interdiction of the Japanese transport fleet not only saved countless lives, but cemented Guadalcanal as a strategic linchpin in the Pacific theatre. As Lieutenant John Mason of PT-92 reflected in a post-action log, "We didn't just sink ships, we bought time, we saved comrades, and we held a line." Guadalcanal wasn't just a place on a map. It became proof that a few determined souls, armed with courage and precision, could change the course of war. The battle for supply lines had been won, but the struggle for Guadalcanal itself was far from over. Japanese forces would continue attempts to reclaim initiative, setting the stage for the brutal campaigns that would define the Solomons conflict in the coming months. November 3rd to 15th, 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The failure of Japan's transport fleet forced a strategic pivot. With 38 of the 50 transports sunk by PT boats and air attacks, Japanese command recognized that daylight reinforcement was untenable. Destroyers, fast and maneuverable, became the new lifeline to Hyakutake's embattled troops. These nocturnal runs, later dubbed the Tokyo Express by Allied forces, were designed to deliver men, rations, and light weaponry under the cover of darkness, minimizing exposure to marine artillery and U.S. aircraft. Rear Admiral Reizo Tanaka, tasked with coordinating these runs, meticulously planned each sortie. Using intelligence from reconnaissance flights and naval charts of Ironbottom Sound, he sought to exploit gaps in the American patrol network. Destroyers typically carried only a fraction of the intended troops, prioritizing speed and the element of surprise over bulk cargo. While these night runs allowed partial reinforcement, they imposed heavy strain on crews, often requiring multiple trips with minimal rest. American forces, however, adapted quickly. The successes of PT boats in late October emboldened commanders to intensify night patrols. By November, coordinated strategies combined radar-equipped PT boats, searchlight-equipped destroyers, and aerial reconnaissance to detect and intercept Japanese craft. Intelligence gathered from magic intercepts provided real-time updates on Japanese orders, allowing U.S. units to anticipate the timing and routes of night runs with remarkable accuracy. Lieutenant John Adams of PT-109, operating out of Tulagi, recorded the efficiency of these patrols in his log. "We knew they'd come after dark. Every channel had a sentinel. Each destroyer we intercepted slowed the flow of men and supplies. It was dangerous work, but we held the line." The first engagements of November illustrated the deadly cat-and-mouse dynamic. On the night of November 4th, 2 Japanese destroyers attempted to land troops near Tassafaronga. PT boats 61 and 109, using intelligence from a P-38 reconnaissance sortie, intercepted the formation. 3 torpedoes found their marks. 1 destroyer sank immediately, the other retreated with heavy damage. Reports later indicated over 300 Japanese casualties, a crippling blow for a mission designed to reinforce several hundred men. Despite these setbacks, Japanese commanders refined their tactics. Destroyers travelled in staggered waves, zigzagged through narrow channels, and employed smoke screens to obscure their movements. At the same time, smaller landing barges were deployed to ferry troops from offshore destroyers to beaches, reducing exposure to PT boat attacks. This adaptation, while resourceful, stretched Japanese naval assets thin and demanded constant coordination under extreme stress. On Guadalcanal, Marines witnessed the ebb and flow of these night operations with both vigilance and frustration. While supplies occasionally arrived, they were often insufficient to alter frontline conditions significantly. Colonel Merritt Edson noted in his after-action report, "The Japanese continue to probe our defences. Night after night, their destroyers attempt to run the gauntlet. We have learned to respond, and our PT boats, artillery and aircraft, create a defensive net that makes each attempt costly. Meanwhile, U.S. air units leveraged every advantage. P-38, Lightning and SBD Dauntless squadrons patrolled near known landing zones at dawn, often intercepting Japanese craft retreating from failed night missions. Fighter pilots exploited altitude superiority and coordinated strafing runs to maximize damage while minimizing risk. Combat reports from the 13th Fighter Command noted that between November 5th and 10th, 9 Japanese destroyers sustained severe damage, with casualties estimated at over 400 men. Japanese war diaries, captured after the conflict, revealed the growing sense of desperation. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Watanabe described in a November 7th entry, "Each night we run to Guadalcanal, we lose men and ships. Our commanders demand results, yet the waters are controlled by the enemy. Survivors are few, and morale suffers. The field we aim to reinforce is well defended. Our advantage in speed cannot overcome their vigilance." The cumulative effect of PT boat operations, artillery fire, and aerial interdiction was stark. Japanese logistical efficiency plummeted. Troops arriving at Guadalcanal were fragmented, under-equipped, and exhausted. For Marines, each night without a successful large-scale reinforcement arrival was a reprieve. allowing them to solidify positions and repair Henderson Field's airstrip, critical for maintaining air superiority. The psychological impact of these continuous night engagements was equally significant. PT boat crews operating in darkness learned to rely on intuition, navigation skill, and coordination. Small victories, such as disabling a destroyer or sinking a landing barge, reinforced morale and confidence in the Allied interdiction strategy. Conversely, Japanese naval officers faced mounting pressure from command to deliver results with diminishing resources, highlighting the high-stakes tension in the Pacific theatre. By mid-November, it became evident that the Tokyo Express, while innovative, could not fully replace the lost transport fleet. The attrition inflicted by PT boats, marine artillery, and air support meant that Japanese forces on Guadalcanal remained understrength and poorly supplied. Hyakutake's men, though determined, faced a grueling struggle for survival, while the Marines consolidated gains, reinforced defensive positions, and prepared for continued Japanese assaults. The lessons from these operations were profound. Small, agile naval units, integrated with intelligence and air support, could disrupt larger forces and control strategic waterways. Guadalcanal had become a proving ground for combined arms tactics, night interdiction, and adaptive warfare, skills that would define much of the Pacific conflict in the months to come. As Lieutenant Adams later summarized, "We weren't just chasing destroyers, we were shaping the battle before it began." Guadalcanal was more than an island. It was a test of nerve, skill, and coordination. Every night we ran patrols, we learned, adapted, and endured. The Japanese learned the same lesson, though at a much higher cost. By November 15th, the Tokyo Express continued, but its impact was limited. Guadalcanal remained firmly in Allied hands, the marine positions strengthened, and the Japanese faced an increasingly unsustainable supply dilemma. The stage was set for the next phase of the campaign, an escalation of assaults, counterattacks, and decisive engagements that would determine control of the Solomons. November 16th to 30th, 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Henderson Field, the small airstrip perched precariously on Guadalcanal's northern coast, had become the linchpin of Allied operations. From its coral runway, U.S. Marine aircraft projected power across the island and surrounding waters, interdicting Japanese supply lines and providing critical close air support to infantry. Control of this airfield was not merely tactical, it was strategic, a key to dominance in the Solomons and the broader Pacific campaign. Japanese commanders, aware that reinforcement via the Tokyo Express was piecemeal and slow, turned their attention to the decisive seizure of Henderson Field. Lieutenant General Hyakutake orchestrated a series of counterattacks intended to neutralize the airfield and restore mobility to Japanese forces on the island. These assaults, concentrated in late November, relied on combined infantry, artillery, and limited air support delivered from hastily repaired aircraft carriers and seaplanes. On November 17th, the first major counterattack commenced. Japanese infantry, supported by light artillery, advanced through dense jungle towards the southern perimeter of Henderson Field. Marine defenders, under the command of Colonel Merritt Edson, had fortified positions with trenches, barbed wire, and improvised obstacles. Machine guns and mortars, supplemented by sporadic P-400 Airacobra sorties, created lethal kill zones that disrupted the Japanese advance. Combat reports from the 1st Marine Raider Battalion recorded the intensity of the engagement. The jungle erupted with fire. Each step forward drew our volleys, each clearing met with grenades. We held at all costs. The airfield must remain ours. Simultaneously, Japanese war diaries and post-war testimonies painted a grim picture of the assault from the opposing side. Captain Takeshi Sato of the 4th Infantry Regiment recounted, "We pressed forward under relentless fire. The Americans had entrenched positions and air support that harassed us even under heavy canopy. Our losses were severe, but orders demanded we take the field." Over the next 3 nights, Japanese units launched repeated assaults, attempting to overwhelm Marine positions before Allied aircraft could fully respond. PT boats continued to intercept supply barges, further limiting Japanese logistical support. Each failed attack depleted manpower and morale. By November 21st, records indicated over 1,200 Japanese casualties, with survivors forced to regroup in jungle encampments far from the airfield. Air power played an increasingly decisive role. Marine and Navy fighters, operating from Henderson Field, conducted low-altitude strafing runs and bombing sorties against Japanese staging areas. Reconnaissance flights identified concentrations of enemy troops, allowing precise targeting that compounded attrition. Intelligence from intercepted radio traffic enabled pilots to anticipate Japanese movements, turning Guadalcanal's jungles into a lethal maze for advancing soldiers. Allied airmen, too, faced peril. The P-38 Lightning squadrons, while dominant in speed and firepower, contended with treacherous weather, limited fuel reserves, and the threat of Japanese Zeros. Squadron logs report multiple engagements in which pilots narrowly avoided flak and enemy aircraft, while providing crucial support to Marines on the ground. Captain William Bill Thompson, reflecting on a November sortie, wrote, "We flew low over the treetops, bullets kicking up around us. The field was under threat, and we were the shield. Each pass cost nerves and sweat, but we could not falter. Guadalcanal depended on it." The cumulative effect of these actions was attrition on both sides. Japanese forces, already weakened by the loss of transports and the night runs of the Tokyo Express, faced the added strain of continuous frontline casualties and exhausted troops. Supplies of ammunition, food, and medical provisions dwindled, while disease and jungle conditions sapped strength further. By contrast, Allied forces, though pressured, maintained supply lines and enjoyed the strategic advantage of air superiority from Henderson Field. A particularly harrowing engagement occurred on November 24th, when Japanese forces attempted a coordinated attack combining artillery and infantry waves on the western perimeter of the airfield. Marine defenders, anticipating the move through reconnaissance and intercepted communications, set pre-planned artillery barrages and coordinated counterattacks. The assault collapsed under combined firepower, leaving over 400 Japanese dead and hundreds more wounded. The psychological impact of repeated failures became evident in Japanese officer reports. Lieutenant Colonel Masahiro Kawano noted in a captured war diary, "The men are brave, yet the enemy's defense is relentless. Each attack drains strength, each failure erodes hope. We are trapped between the sea and the airfield, unable to regain initiative." American morale, conversely, surged. Letters home, post-action reports, and unit diaries emphasized the pride and resolve of Marines and airmen alike. The victory was not yet total, but Henderson Field remained operational, reinforcing the strategic importance of holding key positions despite intense pressure. By the end of November, the struggle for Henderson Field illustrated the harsh realities of attrition warfare. The Japanese could not sustain large-scale offensive operations without sufficient supply, while Allied forces, though stretched thin, leveraged intelligence, air power, and tactical ingenuity to preserve critical positions. Guadalcanal had become a proving ground for coordinated defense, rapid adaptation, and the integration of multiple combat arms under extreme conditions. As night fell over the Solomons on November 30th, the airfield stood intact, a symbol of Allied resilience. Japanese forces, battered and beleaguered, regrouped for future engagements, their ambition to seize the island curtailed by the relentless interplay of attrition, intelligence, and combined arms defense. December 1st to 15th, 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. As the first days of December dawned over the Solomons, Japanese commanders faced a sobering reality. The campaign to reinforce and resupply their troops on Guadalcanal had faltered. Of the 50 transports dispatched in October, only a handful had successfully delivered men and materiel, the rest lost to relentless PT boat attacks, submarine patrols, and air interdiction from Henderson Field. Operational plans drafted by Lieutenant General Hyakutake now collided with harsh logistics. Fuel, food, ammunition, and medical supplies were critically short, and the troops ashore faced exhaustion, disease, and attrition that threatened combat effectiveness. Rear Admiral Turner's naval forces, in coordination with Marine and Army air units, capitalized on Japanese vulnerabilities. Nightly PT boat raids, executed under moonless skies and tracked through intelligence intercepts, targeted every expected approach of supply barges. Reports from PT-109 and sister crafts detailed daring high-speed attacks. We crossed the path of enemy barges at 30 knots. Torpedoes were launched at close range. Explosions lit the water. Burning transports listed and sank. Not a single man escaped unscathed. Guadalcanal's defenders would breathe easier tonight. Indeed, over the first 2 weeks of December, Allied forces accounted for 38 of the original 50 transports, leaving Japanese troops with fragmented supply lines and eroded morale. Combat intelligence highlighted the severity of the logistical collapse. Captured Japanese logs revealed soldiers scavenging for minimal rations, water sources contaminated or overextended, and medical personnel struggling to treat both combat and disease casualties. The Marines, aware of their advantage, consolidated positions around Henderson Field and key hilltops. Defensive works were reinforced, and patrols pushed to interdict Japanese movement along the southern coast. Tactical coordination between ground units and air support became increasingly sophisticated. Reconnaissance flights provided precise targeting for artillery, while P-38 and F-4F fighters harassed remaining Japanese shipping, forcing vessels to hug the shoreline or risk destruction in open waters. Japanese tactical responses grew increasingly desperate. Attempts to consolidate forces inland were hampered by dense jungle and Allied observation. Infantry units, weakened by disease and starvation, could no longer mount effective offensive operations. Artillery and mortars, intended to soften marine defences, were often abandoned due to transport shortages, and remaining guns were subjected to precise preemptive strikes from air reconnaissance. At sea, the situation mirrored the collapse ashore. The Tokyo Express, once a lifeline for Japanese forces, had been rendered precarious. Submarine and PT boat patrols, guided by radio intelligence and visual spotting, intercepted convoys with devastating effect. War diaries of the Japanese 4th Air Group noted mounting frustration. Despite speed and manoeuvring, transports are lost before reaching shore. The enemy anticipates every approach. We are at the mercy of air and sea patrols. The psychological toll on Japanese troops became evident in multiple sources. Post-war interrogations of officers, including Captain Hiroshi Tanaka, described the sense of inevitability that permeated ranks. We knew supplies would not arrive. Each day, food grew scarcer, wounds went untreated. Yet retreat was not an option. Orders bound us to fight. Survival became secondary to duty, though duty itself was hollow without sustenance. Allied forces, conversely, experienced a surge in operational confidence. Victory at Henderson Field had allowed air supremacy to shape subsequent engagements, and intelligence gained from magic decrypts enabled preemptive strikes that further throttled Japanese operations. Brigadier General Alexander Patch, in his command assessments, noted, "The interdiction of transport operations has created a cascading effect. Enemy morale is declining, and supply lines are effectively severed. Guadalcanal will remain in Allied hands so long as we maintain pressure from both sea and air." By mid-December, the consequences of attrition and logistical collapse became unmistakable. Japanese forces on Guadalcanal were increasingly isolated, unable to replace casualties or replenish essential supplies. Coastal defences crumbled as artillery ammunition ran low, infantry units disbanded into scattered groups, and medical facilities were overwhelmed by the combined effects of combat wounds and disease. Allied consolidation was methodical. Patrols extended beyond immediate defensive perimeters, securing key ridges, river crossings, and potential landing zones. Coordination between the Navy, Marines, and Army Air Forces created an integrated network of interdiction and observation. Even small units on the ground were empowered to act with autonomy, executing pre-planned strikes against Japanese positions identified via reconnaissance. The cumulative effect was an unyielding pressure that precluded Japanese counteroffensives and ensured that Guadalcanal's defenders could dictate the tempo of operations. The destruction of Japanese transports, coupled with continuous aerial bombardment and ground pressure, signalled the beginning of a turning point in the Solomons campaign. Historians would later note that the inability of Japanese forces to sustain supply lines effectively ended their capacity for major offensive operations on Guadalcanal. The lessons of December 1942 emphasized the decisive role of integrated naval, air, and ground operations, as well as the strategic value of intelligence and preemptive action in attrition warfare. By December 15th, Guadalcanal was secure in Allied hands. Henderson Field remained operational, PT boats continued to patrol the coast, and Japanese forces were largely contained to the interior, deprived of the resources necessary to mount effective resistance. The campaign, costly in lives and materiel, had demonstrated the critical importance of logistical dominance and the ability to leverage intelligence and mobility to shape outcomes in the Pacific theatre. As Japanese transport losses mounted, the desperation of shorebound troops became increasingly acute. Soldiers scavenged abandoned barges washed ashore, sifting through crates of spoiled rations and damaged ammunition. Engineers struggled to keep mortars operational, cannibalizing damaged weapons for parts. Disease spread rapidly in the jungle, with malaria, dysentery, and infections claiming more men than enemy fire. Letters recovered post-war from Japanese enlisted men paint a stark picture of daily hardship. We fight not only the Marines, but hunger itself. Every step toward the ridge feels heavier, every night colder. Yet no relief comes from the sea. Our officers urge endurance, but what is endurance without food? Meanwhile, PT boats continued to exploit Japanese vulnerabilities with remarkable precision. Operating under strict radio silence, crews relied on moonless nights, currents, and intelligence intercepts to locate and engage convoys. Each attack was meticulously planned. Torpedoes were set for optimal detonation against the lightly armoured hulls of transports. Reports from PT-59 and PT-44 describe manoeuvres executed at speeds exceeding 30 knots, weaving through reefs and dodging coastal batteries, a testament to both skill and courage. The psychological impact on Japanese crews was immediate. Many transports were abandoned before reaching shore, and small contingents of troops often drowned attempting to swim to safety. Allied air support amplified the effectiveness of the naval interdiction. P-38 Lightnings and F-4F Wildcats patrolled coastal waters, dropping flares to illuminate targets and strafing barges attempting to run the blockade. Reconnaissance aircraft from Henderson Field provided continuous updates on Japanese movements, allowing PT boats to intercept with near-perfect timing. The coordination between air and sea units became a model of integrated operations, one that would influence subsequent campaigns throughout the Pacific. By late December, the cumulative effect of these operations had transformed Guadalcanal into a largely self-contained defensive network. Marines and Army units occupied fortified positions with secure supply lines, while Japanese forces, deprived of reinforcements and munitions, struggled to maintain cohesion. Intelligence reports indicated the emergence of ghost units, small Japanese detachments isolated in the jungle, surviving on minimal rations and largely disconnected from command. These units became easy targets for patrols, effectively neutralized without large-scale engagement.